Steven Caldwell is here to react to the brutal news for Alphonso Davies in Canada Soccer on Wednesday. The superstar's season, it's over after Bayern Munich confirmed a torn ACL in his right knee, suffered in that Canada-USA Nations League game on the weekend. And Steven, we have a quote from Davies' agent, Nadel Huoseh, who spoke to One Soccer, and he's criticizing Jesse Marsch and Canada Soccer for even playing Davies in that match. The statement reads in part that Alphonso was not 100% after the Mexico game. It was planned that he was not going to start against the USA on Saturday. The expectation he would not be in the starting 11. As captain, I feel he was pressured to start the game by the coach. Alphonso was not the kind of guy to say no in those moments. He ended up playing, and look what happened, end quote. Canada Soccer needs to do a better job, he even went on to say, managing these players. So that's the end of the quote. Steven, wow, what do you make of those comments from the agent?
Look, I think everyone's disappointed and everyone's emotional and feels like, you know, it's such a horrible end to Alphonso Davies' season, considering that Bayern Munich are top of the Bundesliga and still in the Champions League. But I think he should have thought a little bit more, taking his time before saying the things. I think they come out of frustration that he is injured, and the fact that it happened on international duty is always a contentious point. So ultimately it was a mistake from the agent. He should have took his time with that one. He should have thought about it a little bit more. And I think, and without knowing the full details, it's hard to be critical of Canada Soccer. It's one of the things. ACL usually comes from innocuous things, either a stud in the turf or a tackle or a twist. It's summing out of nothing. So yeah, the emotion and the frustration is there to be heard within that statement, but ultimately I don't think he should have made it.
Canada Soccer releasing a statement saying in part that Canada Soccer's coaches and experienced medical staff are true professionals and have always prioritized player safety and well-being. Anything suggesting otherwise, they say, is untrue. So, Steven, how do these decisions get made behind the scenes about who starts, who doesn't, when there are potential injuries at play here?
Well, about 80% of these guys go out week in, week out, game in, game out with some kind of niggle, some kind of problem. And so yeah, it's always a balancing act. Is this detrimental to the player's health? Is this something that he can play through? What is the magnitude of this game? So there's so many components that come into it. What is the strategy? How important is this player to the starting 11? There's so many things that go into it, and it's heightened in international because you don't know these players as well as you might do it in the club, and they come in often with fatigue and injuries and niggles and different things. So it's a balancing act, but he's a leader on the team. He's a guy, the captain. He's one of the most important players, if not the most important player. So you want to see him out there. So I understand Canada wanting to see him out there, and I don't think that the injury that Alphonso Davies was carrying coming into this game was anyway related to the knee. Did it play a part? We'll never know. We speculate on these things, but there's many things that go into it. There's a medical department, there's a coaching department, there's the player himself, and I think again it's just one of the things that at times it is unfortunate. Other times you play, you're 50%, you get through the game, the team wins, and you feel great. So it's horrible. Everybody's sad and upset at this, but ultimately this is football. These things happen in the game, and you have to accept it as a player, and you certainly have to accept it as a staff, and always analyse, always try and get better. But sometimes it's in the hands of the gods, and it's fate when these things happen.
Yeah, and you mentioned the player as well. We've yet to hear from Alphonso Davies. Like, how much was he lobbying to get in that match or start that match against the Americans as well? We'll have to wait and see his answer on that. But of course, Steven, all soccer fans have their eyes on next summer's World Cup as well. Knee injuries can be so tricky to predict, recovery time. But for a player who relies so much on speed and explosive movements, how concerned are you that this injury could affect Davies' performance and Canada in general at the World Cup?
It's a serious injury. We have to recognise that. 25, 30 years ago, this was an extremely serious injury. But with the advancements in medicine, in care, players' fitness these days, it is an injury that a lot of players come back from just as healthy as before the injury. So I assume Alphonso Davies is an extremely fit guy. He's going to do everything that's asked of him. He's going to make sure that he totally rehabs properly and he's prepared to come back. And I don't see it being too much of a deterrent with this kind of injury. The main thing with an ACL is getting that flexion back, being able to flex that knee and make sure there's no stiffness in it, and that does not affect performance. And I think if Alphonso Davies had a more acute muscle injury like a hamstring rupture or something like that, I would be more concerned about that when it comes to the attributes of his games than an ACL. We don't know again about time. Some guys come back from this thing in 6 or 7 months. Others take a year plus. So again, it's one of these things. How do you heal? How do you get better? But what we've seen from Davies, whenever we've been told a length of injury, he comes back a little bit quicker. So it shows you that he's a quick healer, that he's capable of getting back, and that I see this being the same thing. What are we about? 15 months, 16 months away from the World Cup. To me, there's enough time for Alphonso to get back, to be at full speed, to play some games, and to be 100% ready for the home World Cup.
Yeah, and Davies recently signed that long-term contract to remain with Bayern Munich until 2030. So we'll have to wait and see how that recovery goes and when he can return to game action. Thanks, Steven.